Welcome back and thanks for staying with us. We speak now to Professor Adam Habib on the latest incidents of unrest in the Free State town of Senekal. We'll also ask him his thoughts on the many investigations into the procurement of personal protective equipment. Some in Senekal have warned the white farmers who tried to storm a court building they would be given war if they wanted it. This came after the white farmers held a march outside the Senekal Magistrate's court this week over the killing of a local farm manager, Brendin Horner. The farmers demanded that the police hand over the two suspects to them. A very good morning to you, Professor Habib. Thanks for making the time.
Thank you for having me.
We're reporting this morning that the Democratic Alliance is opening a criminal case against EFF leader Julius Malema and an EFF MP for what they consider to be incitement. Do you view Malema's tweets as irresponsible?
Absolutely. I think it's the most irresponsible behavior from an MP. I'm not surprised. This is vintage Julius Malema. He's done it on many occasions before. We as a country have allowed him to get away with it. The Human Rights Commission has allowed him to get away with it. Government and Parliament have allowed him to get away with it. I do think there's a problem with the way the white farmers have behaved in Senekal. There's no question about it. However legitimate your cause, what you do not have the right to do is break into a courthouse and burn a police vehicle. People need to be identified, they need to be charged, and they need to be arrested. But why are we surprised by this behavior? Every union meeting, we behave exactly the same. We have unionists who actually burn and threaten others, burn infrastructure. We have political, social protests in exactly the same way. We've had, just not very long ago, the EFF behave in a similar way at click stores, etc. Why are we surprised? We have created a culture of violence. We lament every single day about the challenges of violence in our society. We worry about effectively women and children dying, but every way we behave is to consolidate effectively this violence. So I think it's an irresponsible behavior. I think it's dangerous. Can you imagine if EFF students go there? Effectively, you'll have groups of racists on both sides, and effectively all you need is somebody to pull out a gun and people are going to get really hurt. And frankly, you can't rely on the police. They're the most incompetent police force we've ever had. And so the real question is for a political leader to make such an inflammatory comment is outrageous. And the fact that we've tolerated it as a society is even more outrageous. We claim we're a constitutional society. We truly are not. We're increasingly becoming an anarchic society. And that's the real challenge. And I think we all have to start doing some self-reflection in this regard.
Will a challenge at the courts carry weight, though?
Sorry?
The DA challenge at the courts, will that carry weight?
Yeah, you see, I'm not really certain. I mean, the problem with the DA's response is traditionally now, over many years, its characteristic responses, politically, we don't like what's happening, let's go to the courts and get the courts to intervene on the matter. I don't think that's going to resolve this. I think there is a role for the courts, and I think they can play important roles in particular moments. But what I do think we have to resolve is the politics of the challenge. And I think we've got effectively a political challenge in South Africa today. What we've got is we as a society allow a set of political activities that are outrageous. We've allowed Jacob Zuma to engage in the most corrupt of acts. And we used to giggle about this. In a similar way, we get bemused by Julius Malema and his antics. But there are consequences to this. As much as today we suffer the consequences of Eskom's collapse or Transnet's collapse as a result of allowing Zuma to do what he did. Today, down the line, we're going to pay the consequences for allowing Julius Malema and others who are violent to get away with it. We moan about corruption in our society. Why are we surprised by it? Why are we surprised that PPEs and food parcels are getting stolen, when the ruling party at the highest levels of leadership has groups of leaders who are utterly, utterly corrupt. And so we need to start asking, are we really serious as South African society, or will we continue to tolerate the kinds of politicians that we have? Every one of these politicians, I mean, isn't it a bit rich for the EFF to complain about white farmers? All they were angry about is the white farmers have effectively done what the EFF has been doing for the last 2 or 3 years. So it's hypocritical to actually accuse them of anything. They're just behaving exactly the way the EFF has behaved. And the EFF often behaves the way large parts of the ANC behave. Look at how many people have come to the defense of Ace Magashule or Denosa and others coming to the defense of the MEC for Health in Gauteng. Unions are as implicated in the corruption and the political shenanigans that are playing themselves out in our society. And I think we all need to start asking, are we serious about having a democratic society? Or do we want to have an anarchic society that completely fractures and that completely destroys itself?
Prof, I'll come back to you about most aspects of society being affected. But let's speak a bit here about President Cyril Ramaphosa's note from the president that comes out on Mondays. I don't know if you've read it already. He weighs in on the conversation about what happened in Senekal. He says the people who think that farmer tax affect just a small part of our population are wrong. The farming community is an integral part of our economy. The farming community produces food that we eat. Violent crime on farms poses not just a threat to the safety of our communities, but of our nation's food security. The claim that violent crime on farms is part of an orchestrated campaign by blacks to drive white farmers off their land is simply not borne out by fact. Your thoughts, Prof?
No, I think he's absolutely right. So, I mean, let's be honest. Killing a farmer in our society should be condemned. It is unacceptable. But people are dying in all forms of murder in our society should be condemned. I do not believe, as AfriForum and others believe, that there is a genocide that is underway, that there is a direct intent to get rid of white farmers on land. I think it's part of the broader criminalization of our society. And the real victims, most of the victims of criminals in our society are black people. So it should be condemned for white people. When white people are murdered, it should be condemned for black people. We should be horrified at the criminalization of our society. So what I would like to say to the president, you're absolutely right. It's not an orchestrated attempt against white farmers. But you should be asking yourself as the president, is it tolerable to have this criminalization of South African society? And what are you doing to fix this? When EFF goes and petrol bombs click stores, why are you silent? When people are being killed in farms, both black and white, why are you silent? When people are dying in our townships, why are you silent? And what are you doing to make sure that the Minister of Police and the police services start appointing decent, qualified people to do the job? Because today, you're safer by paying protection money to gangs than to rely on the police because they're so incompetent. And as the president of the country, you're responsible for this. Why are you not standing up to be saying what the police force is a shameful situation and we need to fix it? We need a democratically constructed police force that understands the limits of how to operate in a democracy, but are capable of doing their job. And frankly, 80% of the police force are incapable of doing the job. And that's because an ANC government has been appointing them for 20 years.
In fact, we wake up this morning to the news of a deputy national police commissioner who has been arrested on charges of, amongst others, fraud. How much trust can we put in the South African Police Service?
But that's the point. You know, in a sense, nobody really trusts them. Here's the problem with the police force. First is the corruption. And this example is exactly, you can't trust them because of the corruption. But walk into any police station today and try and fill out a complaint form. And you will see they're incapable of writing down the complaint.
Yeah.
They often ignore you. The incompetence is far worse than the corruption itself. You know, everybody complains about the corruption under Jacob Zuma. And I am horrified by that. But what incensed me more about the Jacob Zuma administration is not only the corruption, is the incompetence of the place. So Eskom collapsing, Transnet collapsing, and we have to live through the burden. And that's not simply a corruption question, it's an incompetence question. Yeah. We've been appointing people who don't know how to do their job. And that's something we should all be worried about.
Let me just ask you one final question, Prof. Another conversation that's making the rounds. It started a while back, but Professor Tuluma Denzela brought it back now with that tweet about, do you agree with the idea of amnesty for full disclosure for minor involvement in corruption, including state capture? Also saying people can self-disclose without huge consequences. It will allow us to clean the system. What are your thoughts about corruption amnesty?
So I must say I'm two-minded about it. On the one hand, I can understand why Tulima Denzela wants to say it, but here's the problem. You declare an amnesty on two conditions. You create this kind of Truth and Reconciliation Commission on two conditions. One, when you don't have the capacity to know what happened. Under the TRC, we didn't know what happened to many thousands of activists, and we wanted to find out to enable closure. Actually, with corruption, it's not true that we don't know. We know all of the stories that are playing out at the State Capture Commission. We know who's been stealing. We know what has happened. So there is no challenge around this. And the second is, if you can't act, here's my problem with the corruption amnesty. Effectively, if we every 10 years start declaring amnesty for corruption, for murder, for violence, you'll create a culture in the society where all you do is create problems, threaten people, and then the government gives you an amnesty in exchange. And then the next political elite come, they'll do the same thing and demand amnesty because the white elite under apartheid. The fact that bureaucrats under apartheid were stealing does not legitimate stealing in a democratic South Africa. I want to be clear about this. The fact that P.W. Botha was a murderer does not mean we can be murderers and claim amnesty because the white guy 40 years ago was a crime against humanity. Don't use that as a yardstick to justify behavior today. Because apartheid bureaucrats stole does not mean ANC politicians or EFF politicians or Democratic Alliance politicians can steal today. That's not acceptable. And that's what we South Africans must say. We must say the stealing stops, the violence stops, and we throw you out of power if you can't do this. That's the lesson. Ultimately, this is not the fault of politicians. It's our citizens. We get the government we chose. And that's the real consequence. The behavior of violence is because we've tolerated it so much in unions, in student protests, in community protests. We tolerated the violence. So don't cry crocodile tears today because we've got violence. We've created the pattern that allowed this to emerge. And we must take responsibility as the citizens of this country.
I know you're rushing off to another meeting, but just a quick one. How are you winding off your work at Wits University as you prepare for your next challenge?
We've appointed Zeblan Velikazi. He's doing well. I'm handing over to him I'm excited at the fact that Zebulon enables it to greater heights. So he and I have been working over the 3 months. I think it's important for public institutions to have a dignified succession. And Zebulon and I are working hard to ensure that we have a dignified succession at what is one of the premier public universities in this country.
Lessons for other institutions in the country. Thank you so much for talking to us this morning.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Professor Adam Habib there talking about issues in the country at the moment, including crime and corruption. Let's take